Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Mathieu.
Welcome to episode 25 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. In this week's episode, AJ and I do a deep dive into the DNA of an unfriendly church. In this episode, we specifically discuss the 7 most common expressions of unfriendliness in an inwardly focused and unfriendly church. Being an unfriendly church is reversible. And in this episode, AJ and I give concrete and actionable steps you can take if your church is showing signs of being an unfriendly church. To read today's show notes, visit malphursgroup.com/25. malphursgroup.com/25. Now, let's dive in.
All right, welcome back to the Church Revitalization Podcast. This week, episode 25. What a great number, Scott. I can't believe we're on 25.
25, man. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's we've gotten such great feedback, so thank you for that. I mean, thank you for at least mentioning something whenever you might call us or chat with us or email us. I mean, that's great motivation, to keep plugging along and producing this. But this week we're talking the DNA of an unfriendly church. And this is a really interesting topic, and sometimes it's not always what you see on the surface either. So that's what we're going to kind of dive into a little bit today. And I think as maybe our conversation unfolds, we'll get a little bit below the surface there from maybe what the main points are and kind of talk about what's behind these things.
There's really, when we talk about the DNA of an unfriendly church, there's really one key characteristic that drives all of these sort of expressions of unhealth or unhealthiness. And so, and unfriendliness. So what is that? What is that core central problem that makes a church in its DNA sort of unfriendly and therefore unhealthy?
Yeah, that is that it's inwardly focused and not outwardly focused. And that is something that doesn't happen overnight. That's something that happens over time. And then it gets expressed in some characteristics that become very visible to people from the outside or from guests. So that's really at the core, especially, by the title, DNA of an unfriendly church. Really in the DNA, what gets developed into the DNA is this inwardly focused thing where we really have maybe lost that original intent of being, salt and light in the world. And instead it's become more about just, taking care of each other and I don't know, I guess in some cases just preaching to the choir on Sundays and everybody gets maybe, they have the sense of fulfillment because they go in every Sunday and it's like, wow, this is great. This is us, we're really together. We're solid. But you're supposed to be welcoming guests and growing the kingdom, and that's why this is an important topic. And this is probably why this is also a very popular search topic that people are looking for online, and we get a lot of traffic because of that.
Yeah, what's interesting too. We've wrapped up promotion for Church Revitalization University, so you don't have to worry about us promoting that this week to you. But what was interesting is in that promotion, as we were kind of like running some Facebook ads and getting some feedback from people that we are not connected to in any way, but just pastors kind of responding and commenting. A lot of the comments were so not negative directed at what we were doing or at Church Revitalization University, but at the idea of getting out and reaching people in the first place. Like that was what was maybe shocking to me or surprising to me, is just the pervasiveness, AJ, of this attitude that maybe the culture is already lost. And so I think it compounds that sort of inward focus. Like we ought to just huddle up sort of in caves somewhere and sort of shut ourselves off from the world.
Yeah.
Us for and no more. And I think that, maybe your church is not that, like, especially if you're listening to this podcast, it's probably not to that degree or that extreme. But I think in some small ways, we can start to sort of self-justify this inward focus as almost like protectionism, like we're trying to protect our families and protect ourselves from the world, and as a result, it's more in, and we're forgetting that, God called us to be, in the world, but just not of it.
Right. Yeah, I think you just have to be very, very careful, and it gets very hard to change later. And even, I mean, we're going to talk through 7 points today. If you went through and tried to fix all 7 of these points without fixing the heart that has made them needing to be fixed, it's not going to make any difference, because you're either going to just fall back into old habits, or it's not going to be sincere and it won't be taken well. It'll just be, I don't know, I hate to say it, lipstick on a pig, but
you can deal with all of these symptoms, but if you're not dealing with that root cause, you're right, it's not going to make a difference. But we do want to talk it through today. AJ, we have 7 sort of common expressions. How does this DNA of an unfriendly church express itself? There are 7 very common things that we see in all kinds of churches. And we're hoping that as we go through these things, they're not going to be things that are shocking to you. They're going to be things that you've probably experienced yourself, or you've seen in your church. But what we want to ask you to do as we go through these 7 things is to think critically about your church and go, okay, is this a problem in my church? Or is this something that I assume is not a problem in my church, but actually is? That would be another thing we see a lot. AJ, is people would go, oh, that's not us. But they've just lost touch. They're not seeing themselves clearly. So we're hoping that this is a bit of a mirror for you to reflect on these 7 common expressions of this unfriendliness DNA. And you go, oh yeah, that's us. We've got to work on that. So let's start with the first one. AJ, you have we've said no guest information on the website, but the deeper issue here really is just the website not being built for guests in general.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah. And this is something that we've talked about separately, and we've written about this. And so we'll link that in today's show notes on the article. You'll be able to click into another post that we did. It goes into a little bit more depth on church websites. And you can get to those show notes from malfersgroup.com/25, just the number 25. So yeah, your website is important. I mean, we say this, that, it's the new front door of your church. And so guests are most certainly going to go to your website. They want to figure out who you are. If your website is not there ready to welcome them and tell them about who you are, then it's going to leave them either maybe not wanting to take a risk and go, or, feeling, just like there's, I don't know, maybe there's secrets, or that you're just not really interested in providing very much information. And we live in a culture that, we want like instant information, right? We're used to that. And so people don't want to, think like, I'm going to have to go there for like 2 months, try to figure out what these guys are all about. So just make it easy for people. But yeah, a church that in its DNA is unfriendly, they're not thinking about that.
Right.
Or maybe they don't even have a website at all. Oh my goodness.
I'm surprised at the number of churches that we come across that still don't have, they might have a Facebook page or something, but they don't have a website. AJ, I think it's even further than that. Like, I think if you and I were traveling together, actually we've done some traveling already together this year, AJ, and we've got more coming up. And AJ and I, okay, listen, if you're listening, if you have 12 hours, less than that, let's say 8 hours in London, what would you do? Send us leadership@malfersgroup.com. Let us know what you would do. But as AJ and I are planning out the 8-hour layover that we have later this year in London, I'm sure we're going to be like Googling some restaurants, right?
Yeah.
And when we go to that restaurant's website, imagine that website only being written for or geared towards people who already know the menu, people who already know what it looks like inside, people who already know what the food is like. You know what I mean? If a restaurant made their website for the people who have already been to the restaurant, that would be ridiculous. And you would say, that is the dumbest thing ever. But that's how churches build their websites. They build their websites oftentimes for the people who have already been there. They already know when the services start, where the church is, what it looks like inside, what's expected. And you might have more and more churches have like a what to expect one little tab, but the whole experience of the website. Let me just tell you right now, a guest is looking at more than just the what to expect page on your website. They're going through every page, maybe not reading everything, but they're doing a quick, glance through the whole website. And I think it's more than that, AJ. Like, I'm not just going to check out that restaurant's website. I'm going to go to Yelp. I'm going to go to Google. I'm going to look at pictures of what it looks like. I'm going to go on Facebook and see it. You need to be aware of all those things. Like, if someone Googles your church, and there's always little pictures of a place, you can actually upload your own pictures and tag that place.
Yeah.
So if the photos that are showing up right now are not flattering, hey, those can get drowned out by just new pictures getting posted. Google's an equal opportunity there. So those are the kinds of things you want to think about. People cyber stalk places before they go there, guests especially. And if you're wondering why you haven't had guests in a while, I would start with looking at your online presence. Are you scaring people away before they ever even get there?
Yep, that can happen.
All right, number 2, you have no guest parking or maybe limited guest parking. Let's talk about the challenges of guest parking and what have you seen here in unfriendly churches?
Yeah, I mean, the idea and what we would certainly recommend is that you're giving your best to your guest, and it even rhymes. So you could make that into a motto for your team. Give our best to the guest. But a lot of times you don't see that. If you see guest parking at all, and let me go ahead and just say this, sometimes the guest parking looks neglected. The signs are faded, or maybe the language on it is just kind of weird or outdated sounding. Definitely come across that a lot. And that almost, sometimes now that I'm thinking about this, the churches that have like old, faded, bent guest parking signs,
see a lot of those.
They don't have a lot of guests. And, I think there you go. That's a DNA component right there. I think if you can see obvious neglect in your parking lot on your guest parking area, you probably have just been neglecting guests in a lot of places in your church. This is like a little epiphany for me here right now. So, so this is not rocket science. Give them a good close up front spot and have it look fresh and taken care of. Replace the signs every 15 years if you have to, so that they look like they still have some color in them.
AJ, when we talk about values, that you do what you care about.
Yeah.
And if you have a sign that you can't read, but the inside is immaculate, or updated or cleaned or whatever, but the stuff that the parking lot or the visitor parking sign, it just shows that you don't really value those things. Because if you did, you would have fixed it. Right?
Yeah. Yep.
Like, anybody who knows me knows my lawn is never going to be awesome because I don't care about my lawn. It's not a value of mine. If I cared about it, it would be in great shape. But there are things in my life that AJ, like, I put a lot of effort into making sure that, to the best of my skill, and I'm not a professional designer by any means, but anything that we put out, like a proposal or, the reports that we generate or whatever, is always going to look as best as I know how to make it.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
Because that's important to me. My lawn is never going to look awesome because I don't care about it. And if your visitor parking or guest parking signs are all janky and faded, you obviously don't care about that. You would have found the money if it was a value.
Right. Yep. So go out to the parking lot and have a look. Maybe you already know, you're like, oh yeah, that's me.
Right.
Well, there you go. Freshen that up.
Number 3, AJ, greeter problems. We say untrained greeters, but let's make it bigger than that. Sort of greeter issues.
Mm-hmm. Because I mean, greeters are only going to be trained as much as you understand what they should be doing well. So if the DNA of the church is not one that puts an emphasis on this, then it will not have occurred to you that maybe greeters even need training. You might think that the only training they need is only give one bulletin per person. So,
Right.
because I've walked into those churches. I mean, I've had just sourpuss looking old guy open up a door and, that was it. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll just take one of those pieces of paper from you then and continue on inside. So yeah, your greeters, I mean, gosh, I mean, this is a big first impression thing right here. I mean, if you've got somebody, and so I've seen it both. I've seen the mean looking old man, and then I've seen the super excited, not like fake, but just somebody that truly was excited. I mean, that you're there, whether they knew you or not. And the best of them maybe have a way of figuring out maybe you're new. And they're like, wow, is this your first time? We're so happy that you're here. And then, hopefully maybe handing you off to somebody with a little bit more information or whatever that you need.
Just a side note. If you're afraid of saying the words, is this your first time? Because if you're like me, you're really bad at remembering faces and it might not be their first time and you're afraid of saying that. You can always say something like, have we met before? Or something like that, where you're giving them a chance to say, I'm not, no, this is my first time, or I think we maybe met last time, or something like that, where you go, oh, okay. There are ways to say, is this your first time? Because it is kind of bad if someone's been there 6 weeks in a row and you've never noticed them and you ask them, is it your first time? Find creative ways to say that, unless you're really good with names and faces, and then you can say, is this your first time? But if you're like me and you can't trust your memory, say it a different way. That gives you a little more leeway. But the idea is still, it's not how you say it. It's that you would even think to.
Well, you can even connect these two things. So your guest parking and your greeters. Now, depending on the layout of your parking lot and your entrance and all that, but if you've got an entrance close enough to be within eye shot of your guest parking, then your person holding the door open can easily see where that person just parked and go, hey, we're so glad that you're here. Is this your first time? Or maybe just you've visited once or twice before. And you can spot them. You don't need to smother them. But again, maybe you've got somebody inside, or you have a welcome center, somebody else at a booth. You can go, hey, head on over and talk to Judy over there, because she's got some, she can answer all your questions, has some great information for you. So yeah, guest parking and greeters can work hand in hand, and they're both a part of your first impressions team.
All right. Number 4. Yeah. Number 4. Unfriendly churches ignore people. They ignore guests. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. And this can happen just in a variety of ways, from not having guest parking to not being greeted to not having any kind of guest information area to, we're going to talk about the next one, not acknowledging they're in the service, but just being ignored. If people can come in new to your church, park, walk in, go to a service and leave, and they were never really welcomed or introduced, then you've got numerous things going wrong.
Right.
And that's not good.
Yeah. You're right, AJ. Like it's at first a systems problem. Like if you don't have the systems in place to catch new people, they're likely to get ignored. But most churches kind of consider them, we're going to talk more about this in a little bit, but consider themselves as friendly, but they're just friendly. It's human nature. You're going to be friendly with people you know. Like it's uncomfortable to talk to somebody you don't know. Even for an extrovert, you're still probably most likely to talk to somebody that you know first before someone that you don't know. Mm-hmm. And if that's just a part of the culture of your church, to just kind of group up, and again, we're going to talk more about this in a minute, it's just likely that someone is going to get ignored. And I would say most people don't want to be smothered. They just want to be acknowledged. It's equally uncomfortable to have someone sit next to you that you don't know and them ask you 20 questions. What do you do? Where do you live? Where do your kids go to school? What's your favorite color? what kind of ice cream do you like? Like that is also annoying. Guests want to be acknowledged, have an opportunity to connect to the degree that they want to connect. The unfriendliness of a church, it seems like, tell me if I'm reading this right, AJ, from what we've gone through so far. It's first a systems issue. You've got to sort of build that in structurally, but it's deeper than that. It's also sort of a cultural issue within the church.
Most certainly. And that's expressed
and they're self-perpetuating
from the top down.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, they end up becoming kind of a circular thing. If you don't have the systems, you probably don't have the systems because you didn't have the culture to begin with, and then that perpetuates each other. But if you want to make a change, then you can develop the systems, and based on then how you train people and the way you talk about it with your leaders, then that's how you can begin to have that DNA or that heart change, culture change in the church.
All right, let's move on. So number 5, guests not acknowledged during the service. So there's a couple things at play here. There's sort of a routine or habit sort of thing, and then it goes deeper than that. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, and this doesn't have to be, like some major big involved thing, but just say, hey, we're glad that you're here. If you're a first-time guest, and then follow that up with whatever piece of pertinent information they need to know, or maybe even not. Just, hey, we're just glad you're here. It should definitely,
there should definitely be some sort of call to action. I think
it should be some call to action. And for me, I think the best thing is, hey, after the service, stop by our guest info lobby booth out there, because the pastor would love to shake your hand, or one of our team would love to shake your hand, or we just love to give you some information. And we have a little gift that we would love to give you, and make sure that we can help you get connected, in the best way possible. That really is all that you need to do, but what you should be doing. And we've definitely seen some good and bad versions of this. But something. Let me kind of tell this story briefly as well, because I was just recently at a church that has definitely fallen out of even expecting guests. They're just at that stage of their life cycle in which guests are not even on the radar because they're not getting them. And after a while, that perpetuates itself as well. You're like, we don't get guests. Why should we act like we want guests anymore? And so it was sort of a revelation for this pastor that hasn't been there that long, to start acting like you get guests, even though you're not getting guests. And I think that would go hand in hand with a heart change and praying. If you really desire to be a guest friendly church and to be, growing the kingdom of God, then you should be praying that would happen. But along with that, just start acting like it's already happening. And maybe the congregation is like, did pastor fall and hit his head? Why is he saying, if you're new here today, we'd love to meet you after the service? We know there's nobody here. Right. But do that every week, whether there's somebody new or not. If you want somebody new to be there, start acting like they're already there, and be ready to welcome them at the door. Have a guest info booth. Be ready to stand in one particular place so that people can find you and greet them after the service and tell them that you're happy that you're there. And if people think you're crazy, fine, but you should be doing that.
I think what happens when you start to embody that, what happens is it starts to make all the little micro decisions that you weren't thinking about before.
Yeah.
You start acting differently in hundreds of small ways. And it's the accumulation of all of those small decisions, I think, that lead to real deep change. And so, in the example of our church plant, we grew from just our launch team to, a church of 400 people within a year and a half. Which was the max that we could really fit in the YMCA where we were meeting. And I think that was largely a byproduct of us just kind of always viewing ourselves as that size church, even when we weren't, and operating that way. So I don't know. All right, let's move on. Number 6, cliques.
Yeah. Boy, oh boy, the cliques in the church. Unfriendly churches, you usually find this. And I don't know, maybe they're aware, maybe they're unaware. But it's tough to be a guest and break into a crowd, right? In any situation, church or outside of church.
But I view cliques as like a Mean Girls. but it's not always. They're not necessarily
No,
like
it's not. No, it's not.
they're not
It's
necessarily like
completely innocent.
yeah. It's not like mean people cliques.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've attended a pretty large church for quite a while, quite a long time. And, but within it is, lots of groups and everything. We have some Sunday school classes that are fairly large. And years ago, we were just trying to find our place. And even in one of those Sunday school classes, we attended for quite a while, just trying to get to know people. Everybody always sat at the same tables. There was these little friend groups that there was no room for guests, basically, in the end. They just weren't thinking that way. And you see this just in a lot of churches. And the thing about this one as well is that people they associate, especially if you ask, are you a friendly church? Which is just a really interesting and tough question. But people will say, oh, yes. And they're not wrong. But the bigger question is, are you friendly to outsiders? Are you friendly to guests or not? Because, the churches that aren't necessarily in their culture and DNA guest friendly, those people love each other. I mean, the people that are there, they genuinely love each other. And they laugh and they smile and they hug and they shake hands every Sunday. And they're having a great time and they love it there. And it's completely missed on them that there's, maybe somebody that's standing there with their arms folded, looking around the room, trying to figure out where to sit or, where to fit in or what this place is all about. And it's hard to do that because everybody's already got a conversation going and they've already got a friend group. So this is a tough one.
What's interesting, I hear this a lot. I've heard this recently in a church that I'm working with, and I've heard it in lots of churches that I've worked with. I think there's a real fear that if we were to open up and we were to start reaching more people and the church would grow, that it would take away from that closeness and friendliness and sort of family feel that we have. Mm-hmm. And there's a fear of welcoming in outsiders because it might mess up the dynamic that we have. And I just want to say that's not how friendliness works or how love works or how it's not like there's only so much pie and we can't let more people in because then there'll be no friendliness pie left.
Yeah.
Right. That you can't have that scarcity mindset.
Infinite pie.
You're right. Like it only feels like you couldn't in your heart make room for one more person because you don't know them yet. But as soon as you get to know them, you feel the same way about them as you did those other people. Yeah. And that is like sort of a lie of the devil to think, oh, we can only be friendly if we stay. It's just always arbitrary. If you're a church of 75 people, well, man, if we were a church of 150 people, we couldn't be as friendly as we are now. You work with a church of 150. Oh, if we were a church of 200 or 300, we couldn't be as friendly as we are now. And so on. It just grows.
Right.
Whatever size you are, if you have that mentality, you think that that's the max that you can be.
Yeah.
And be friendly.
You're putting limits on God, on the kingdom of God. You're saying there's a size limit.
Right.
And wrong.
All right. Number 7, last one here, AJ. And this is a great one to cap it off here. But, if we've not welcomed them in, we've not had a place for them to park, we've ignored them, we weren't even ready for them on the website, we've shut them out from our cliques, we didn't acknowledge them during the service. What are the odds that we're going to, number 7, follow up with guests? What are the odds if we missed all these other things that this is the one we would do? So
probably
no follow up with guests.
Yeah. Or you in pastor school, you learned that you should do that. And so, there's one letter goes out, a card or an email or something, that's, a form letter. And, but no, that's not what we mean. We don't mean, send that postcard. Yes, send the postcard, but personalize it as to the best that you can. Always have a call to action, invite them back to something else, and then continuously follow up with them, making sure that you're just make the offer there. that they won't be able to say, I didn't go back because they just never really welcomed me or invited me back. Never let that be said of you. So always have something, the next thing that you think might be just a great thing for them to be involved with. Maybe it's, some counseling opportunity, or even just an entertainment opportunity. If you have something going on that would be, guest friendly, then invite them to that. But something.
I always like to ask myself the question, what would I respond to? What would I respond to? Would I respond to, a letter that has clearly been printed by the secretary and then was just signed by the pastor? Probably not. I'm not going to respond to that. If I got a handwritten postcard from someone at the church, not necessarily the pastor, but just from a person at the church, I would definitely appreciate that more because someone took the time to write it. I don't know if I would necessarily respond to it, but it certainly would make more of an impact. A text, I'm more likely to respond to a text probably than anything else.
Yeah.
Start thinking through, just pretend like they're you. What would you reply to? What would you respond to? And that's how you should follow up. Like, build a human follow-up process.
Yeah.
Works with humans.
I would rather have met just a plain old person from the church that was working, the guest info booth or the welcome center, and have learned their name. They learned my name, and then get a note from them, even though it's their job to do that. I would rather have that, and with something that said, "Hey, AJ, I enjoyed our conversation. I sure hope you come back. I'd love to talk with you again, or help you get connected." I would much rather have that than a form letter signed by the pastor, whom maybe I didn't even meet that day. And because, his position would not be the welcoming thing back to me. The welcoming thing back would be the even fledgling very beginnings of a relationship that I formed with somebody that just goes to church there.
All right, let's wrap this up, AJ. I'm going to recap here. So at the core of an unfriendly church is sort of an inward focus. And here are 7 ways that typically expresses itself. 1, no guest information on the website, or the website not being built for guests. Number 2, lack of guest parking, or it's faded and neglected. Number 3, untrained greeters, maybe even no greeters, just a bad greeting situation. All of this leading to number 4, guests being ignored. Number 5, guests not really being acknowledged during and throughout the service. Number 6, really difficult to break into the cliques within the church, and you can really feel isolated. This extends past just a guest's first visit, but just over the long term, feeling like, man, I just really can't make a connection. And number 7, really not following up with guests. So wrap this up for us, AJ. What if a pastor or a leader is listening to this podcast and they resonate with some of these challenges, what should they do?
Well, I think they need to search, within themselves and ask that tough question. Do we really want to be a welcoming and growing church? Be honest with yourself. I think, you'll find if you search the scriptures that hospitality is important, and that making and maturing disciples of Jesus is an important call on the church. So if we're going to believe that God's word is God's word, then I think we have no choice but to demand of ourselves that we become a welcoming church. And so to do that, then you fix that heart issue, which is at the core of this, and then you can work on systems and processes and building that into your leaders, who will build that into the overall culture and DNA of your church. So work on your heart, and then work on the hearts of others, and you'll begin to make progress here. I think this is a really key and important part of the church, especially the North American church. And I think this is a big issue in the decline of the North American church that can be overcome and must be overcome. So, I pray that you will take this to heart, this week as you've heard this. Maybe one of the longest podcast episodes we've had, Scott, because we become passionate about this stuff. I know we do.
It is. Yeah, that's a big topic for us.
If you need help, hey guys, we do first impressions evaluations with churches. So definitely, go to malfirstgroup.com. You can reach out to us there or email leadership@malfirstgroup.com. And we'd love to talk with you about us coming and doing a first impressions guest evaluation of your church. Help maybe
it's pretty
point
affordable
out some things
too.
that you can be doing better. It is, yeah. It's great to have a fresh set of eyes on what's going on, especially people that have had a variety of experience and can find things that maybe you're overlooking. So that's might be a really great thing to consider for your church. And I would suggest doing that. Do that every 5 years or so anyway. That could,
or more really often than that,
keep things fresh. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for listening to the Church Revitalization Podcast, episode 25. AJ, great topic today. Thank you so much for getting this article together for us. And just so you know, again, go to malfirstgroup.com/25 to read today's show notes. And again, as AJ said, email us, leadership@malfirstgroup.com if you have questions or if you'd like to talk with us about doing a first impressions evaluation at your church. All right, we'll talk to you next time.